why do some explanations transform civilization while, countless observations just leave us totally confused?
Well, that is really the defining question of this book, The Beginning of Infinity.
Yeah.
And the answer rests on this fundamental tension that we just have to accept. Human knowledge is always fallible. I mean, we are guessing and we make errors constantly.
Right.
Yet despite that fallibility, progress can actually remain completely open-ended when people do three very specific things.
Okay. What are they?
They have to create good explanations. They have to deliberately expose those explanations to rigorous criticism. And most importantly, preserve reliable institutions for correcting the errors they inevitably find.
Okay, so it's not about achieving absolute certainty,
No, not at all.
because we'd be waiting forever for that, right?
Yeah.
But it's also not about throwing our hands up and saying, well, nothing is true. So in this deep dive, we're going to trace this thread, to see how progress actually works. We'll start with the mechanics of a truly good explanation, how conjecture and criticism drive scientific testing, and the vital role of those error-correcting institutions.
Yeah, and the implications of this go way beyond the laboratory, which is what's so fascinating.
Right, because we're going to see how this framework applies to, well, biological evolution, cultural ideas, universal computation, quantum theory.
Mm.
We'll even get into the weeds on artificial intelligence, sustainability, physical limits, and what responsible optimism actually requires of us.
Yeah, the connections between all those domains are really what make this framework so powerful. I mean,
Yeah.
it provides a universal lens for understanding how knowledge grows, whether that knowledge is, sitting in a textbook or encoded in a strand of DNA or running on a silicon chip.
Okay, let's unpack this baseline premise.
Right.
Because to understand how progress happens, we first have to totally rethink how we acquire knowledge. I think the common sense view, like what most of us are taught in grade school, is that seeing is believing. We learn by observing.
Yes, the old induction idea.
Yeah, like you watch the sunrise, you see a rock fall, and if you just gather enough of these observations in a big spreadsheet, a scientific theory eventually just pops out of the data. Why is that intuitive idea wrong?
Well, because observations just do not mechanically generate theories. They don't contain the instructions for the reality that exists behind them.
Okay.
Think about looking up at the night sky. I mean, the raw observed data is just a collection of bright pinpricks of light.
Right, just dots.
Exactly, just dots. That observation does not inherently tell you that those lights are distant nuclear fusion reactors or that they're entirely different galaxies moving away from us.
Oh, wow.
Knowledge actually grows in the reverse order.
Yeah.
We identify a problem, we make a creative conjecture, so a guess, about what is happening behind the scenes, and then we expose that guess to intense criticism.
So the idea comes first.
Yes, you test it, you find the errors, and you replace them. The observation is simply how we test the idea. It is not the source of the idea itself.
Right, so we have to invent the explanation first and then test it against the world. But that brings us to what makes an explanation good. If an explanation is just a creative guess, what separates a good scientific theory from, like, a myth?
Good question.
Well, let's take the seasons. The ancient Greek explanation for winter was that the goddess Demeter was sad because her daughter, Persephone, was in the underworld.
Right.
So she just let the crops die. Now, that is technically an explanation for the observation of winter.
It is an explanation yet, but it's a uniquely bad one because it's entirely unconstrained by the problem it's trying to solve.
Unconstrained, meaning it's too flexible.
Yes. You could easily vary the details without breaking the myth. If you wanted to explain a warm winter, you could just say Demeter was feeling a bit more cheerful that year.
Oh, I see. You could swap Demeter for a different god or say she was angry instead of sad?
Exactly. The explanation can absorb literally any observation just by tweaking the story. But if you look at our modern explanation, that the Earth's axis is tilted, changing the angle of sunlight as we orbit, that is incredibly rigid.
Yeah, because of the math.
Right. That rigidity is the defining characteristic of a good explanation. It is hard to vary. If you change the axial tilt in the model by even a single degree, the entire theory breaks down. It fails to match our observations.
Oh, wow.
So a good explanation exposes specific, rigid claims where criticism can actually succeed or fail. If a proposal can just absorb every possible result without changing its core structure, that apparent flexibility is actually a fatal weakness.
That makes me think about how people often confuse prediction with explanation. The media does this all the time. Like if someone builds an AI black box model that successfully predicts stock market movements, 90% of the time, they claim they've explained the market.
But we really need to draw a hard line there because
Yep.
that is a fundamental misunderstanding. Prediction and explanation are not identical.
Oh.
A black box forecast might be highly accurate in its predictions without revealing a single thing about the underlying causal mechanism. A good explanation aims to identify that mechanism.
So it tells you how it works.
Right. It has to map out the counterfactual structure, like what would happen if conditions were different. A predictive algorithm just spots correlations. An explanation tells you why those correlations exist.
Wait, hold on. I want to push back on this broader idea of fallibility you mentioned earlier.
Sure.
If you're saying every single thing we know is basically a creative guess that could be wrong, aren't you just handing a blank check to conspiracy theorists?
How so?
Well, if we can never be 100% certain, why is modern science any better than astrology? Doesn't fallibilism just mean all opinions are equally valid?
Oh, not at all. And conflating fallibility with relativism is a dangerous trap.
Okay.
Fallibilism simply means that all knowledge may contain errors. It absolutely does not mean all ideas are equally wrong or equally valid.
Because we have criticism.
Exactly. Because we have the mechanism of rational criticism and evidence, we can objectively prefer better, harder-to-vary explanations over weaker ones. Acknowledging that we might be wrong is the essential prerequisite for finding out where we are wrong.
Right. You cannot correct an error if you believe you already possess absolute truth.
Precisely.
And finding out where we are wrong happens through falsification, running the experiment. Though, I mean, even that isn't as clean as a high school science fair makes it seem.
No, it's not.
You don't just run one test, see a bad result, and immediately throw the theory in the garbage.
Right. Falsification is not a simplistic one-test ritual. Every time you run an experiment, you are relying on a massive, invisible network of assumptions.
Like what?
Well, take Galileo looking through his telescope and seeing moons orbiting Jupiter. When his critics refused to believe him, how did he know if his theory of the solar system was right? Or if his theory of optics, how the telescope's lenses worked, was flawed?
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. When a test fails, you don't automatically know which specific idea is guilty. Error correction is a messy, deeply interconnected process of improving background knowledge, building better instruments, and fostering transparent debate.
Okay, so if knowledge grows by this blind process of variation, making creative guesses, and then brutally discarding the mistakes through criticism, isn't that exactly what biological evolution does with genes?
It is very similar.
It feels like human ideas are just doing what DNA has been doing for millions of years.
The mechanism of variation and selection is present in both, yes. Genes are replicators, passing down biological information. And human culture has a parallel. Memes, which are cultural ideas transmitted through imitation.
Right. So does that mean this natural evolution automatically drives moral or technological progress?
We have to be very careful not to conflate biological evolution with human progress. Evolution favors information that reproduces successfully in a given environment. That is an observed mechanism. However, that mechanism does not automatically produce moral progress, nor does it guarantee the welfare of the organism.
Because what survives isn't necessarily what's quote-unquote good for us. I mean, a virus is an incredibly successful replicator.
Exactly.
It's highly evolved, but it certainly isn't driving moral progress.
Right. Evolution is blind and lacks foresight. Human explanatory knowledge is fundamentally different because it adds conscious criticism. We can evaluate an idea, realize it will cause harm, and let the idea die in our minds before it kills us in reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. That conscious generation of ideas brings us right to the doorstep of artificial general intelligence, which is arguably the most fiercely debated topic right now.
Oh, absolutely.
If human cultural transmission involves replicating tasks, and we currently have large language models that can replicate complex writing and coding tasks incredibly well, I mean, a lot of people assume true AGI is basically a few software updates away.
Yeah, that assumes that processing existing data faster is the same thing as generating understanding, which it is not.
Right.
We need to treat AGI as a fundamentally unresolved question. The systems we build today demonstrate remarkable performance on fixed, pre-programmed tasks. They are incredible pattern matchers.
But they aren't creative.
Exactly. General explanatory intelligence requires creativity. It requires the ability to generate entirely new knowledge, propose novel explanations for unprecedented phenomena, and subject them to criticism.
So Predicting the next word in a sentence based on billions of human examples is fundamentally different from, like, Albert Einstein sitting in a patent office and generating the theory of relativity out of a thought experiment.
Precisely. Human universality means we can learn explanations far beyond our inherited ecological limits. I mean, we evolved on the African savanna, yet we can understand the physics of a black hole.
Yeah, that is wild to think about.
Right, and AGI would need that same universal, creative, explanatory capacity, not merely superficial mimicry. We just have not made that conceptual jump yet.
Let's talk about that concept of universality, because it seems to be the hinge for Deutsch's entire worldview.
It is.
This unique human creativity allows our explanations to jump out of our local environment. We developed math using pebbles and fingers, but that same math explains the fusion in distant stars.
The jump to universality.
Yeah, and the clearest example of this jump to universality is probably computation.
Computation perfectly illustrates the principle, yeah. In the early days of computing, machines were built to do one highly specific task, like calculating artillery trajectories.
Right.
But thanks to the theoretical work of Alan Turing and others, we realized that with a modest change in architecture, a system moves from a narrow repertoire to a universal one. A universal Turing machine can compute anything that is physically computable.
But people hear universal computation and they start thinking about sci-fi scenarios, infinite simulations, breaking the laws of physics, creating energy from nothing.
Which is why we have to rigorously define our terms. Universal computation does not mean we have unlimited resources.
Okay, what does it mean then?
It is a theoretical framework that says a universal computer can simulate any physical process, provided it has suitable programs and resources.
Okay.
But we are still strictly bound by physical limits. Computations require time, they require memory, they require energy, and they are constrained by fundamental physical laws.
So you cannot compute a violation of the laws of thermodynamics.
Exactly.
Okay, so we are still bound by physics. But does that mean everything ultimately just boils down to physics? I mean, if fundamental physics constrains every atom in my body, aren't higher level concepts like biology or psychology or even our political systems just, highly complex applied physics?
No, and that kind of reductionism really misses how the world actually functions.
Yeah.
Fundamental physics constrains higher levels. Like you can't build a biological cell that defies gravity.
Right.
But it does not eliminate those higher levels.
Yeah.
This is the concept of emergent levels of explanation.
Emergent levels.
Yeah. You cannot explain the outcome of a complex political election by tracking the trajectory of every subatomic particle in the voters' brains. The emergent levels, biology, psychology, culture, computation, they have their own autonomous rules and mechanisms.
So a software bug is explained by looking at the code, not by analyzing the electrons moving through the silicon chip.
Exactly. And we must explicitly note that domains like ethics, politics, beauty, and history should be treated as philosophical or interpretive arguments. They are vital areas of human knowledge, but they are not absolute laws derived from physics equations. They require totally different modes of rational criticism.
That makes a lot of sense. Having established those boundaries, we have to look at the very edge of where physics is going, which is where David Deutsch's own pioneering work sits.
Yes, the quantum realm.
Right. We're talking about quantum computation and the mind-bending concept of the many worlds theory.
This is an area where we really must carefully separate established scientific results from philosophical interpretations, because the line gets so blurred in public discourse.
Oh, for sure.
Quantum computation relies on observed, experimentally tested theoretical models of quantum mechanics. Those predictive models are incredibly robust, and they are exactly what engineers use to build actual quantum computers today.
Right. The math works, the machines function.
But what about the many worlds part? The idea that every time a quantum event happens, reality branches into parallel universes. People talk about the multiverse like it's a proven fact. Have we actually observed these other worlds?
We have not. And that is a huge misconception we need to correct right now.
Okay.
The many worlds interpretation has not been separately observed or photographed. It is entirely an interpretive framework. Deutsch heavily supports the Everettian many worlds interpretation because he believes it is the best explanation for why quantum mechanics works the way it does. Specifically, it avoids the messy idea that observing a particle magically collapses its state.
Oh, I see.
But it remains a speculative philosophical interpretation of the mathematics, not a direct observation of parallel realities. Okay, that is a really important distinction. What about constructor theory? That's another term that gets thrown around a lot when discussing Deutsch's current work.
Constructor theory is Deutsch's later research program.
Yeah.
Traditional physics usually starts with initial conditions and laws of motion. It tells you what will happen next. Constructor theory attempts to reformulate physics entirely around what is fundamentally possible or impossible to build.
Bill as in construct.
Exactly. It focuses on the constructor, a physical entity that can cause a transformation and retain its ability to cause it again. It links information directly to physical law.
Wow.
It's a fascinating theoretical pursuit that could unify quantum mechanics and information theory, but we should be really clear that it is not currently an established scientific consensus.
Okay, we've covered the mechanics of the universe, quantum theories, and universal computation. Let's bring this back down to Earth.
Good idea.
How does this vast philosophy apply to our civilization's survival and prosperity right now? Because if you take the premise that human beings have an infinite capacity to create knowledge, and that every problem is solvable, it sounds like an excuse to just sit back, relax, and let progress happen. Is Deutsch just preaching blind optimism?
That is a dangerous misreading of what optimism means in this framework. Methodological optimism is not a promise of automatic success.
Right.
It certainly does not mean ignoring danger and does not mean everything is fine. Optimism here is a stance. It treats all failures, evils, and suffering as shortages of knowledge. It implies that if something is broken, we simply haven't discovered the explanation for how to fix it yet. It's a call to action, not complacency.
So if we haven't shared a disease, it's just because we lack the knowledge, not because the disease is inherently invincible.
Right.
But surely not every single problem is solvable.
Correct. We have to separate physical impossibilities from mere ignorance. Some problems violate the laws in physics. You cannot build a perpetual motion machine. But beyond actual physical impossibility, all other limitations are just due to a lack of knowledge. Real physical limits are profoundly different from temporary engineering limits.
That distinction brings us right into the modern debate over precaution. You hear arguments constantly, especially regarding climate change, biotechnology, or AI, that because our technology is so powerful, we should embrace extreme precaution. Like the degrowth movement suggests we should actually stop expanding, stop creating new risks, and just manage what we have.
The demand for extreme precaution is a serious counter-argument today. However, the framework of dynamic error-correcting societies suggests that extreme precaution, specifically inaction, carries even more profound risks.
Really? How so?
If we intentionally stop creating knowledge to avoid hypothetically creating new risks, we leave ourselves completely vulnerable to the massive risks that already exist. Naturally occurring pandemics, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts. These are existential threats that require immense technological knowledge to survive. Stasis is a guarantee of extinction.
Wow, which perfectly frames the discussion around wealth and sustainability. I think a lot of people view wealth like a fixed pie of physical resources. You know, there's only so much gold or oil or land. But under this framework, wealth isn't just a pile of atoms.
Exactly. Wealth is the repertoire of physical transformations you are capable of causing. Think about a lump of coal or a pile of uranium. To our distant ancestors, those were just dirty rocks.
Right. Totally useless.
They had zero economic value. It was human knowledge, the invention of the steam engine, and later nuclear physics that expanded those resources and turned them into wealth.
Oh, that makes sense.
The same goes for sunlight. It was just illumination until we developed photovoltaic knowledge. Knowledge changes which physical transformations are usable.
But expanding our resources doesn't mean we can just pollute the planet endlessly, right?
No, it does not abolish ecological or physical constraints. True sustainability doesn't mean trying to free society in a static state, which is impossible anyway. It requires continuous knowledge creation, aggressive monitoring of our environment, adaptation, and rapid error correction. That capacity is only provided by dynamic societies that encourage criticism and novelty. Societies organized to rigidly preserve fixed traditions lose the ability to solve new problems when their environment inevitably changes.
A dynamic society that constantly seeks the next good explanation. It really is a powerful lens. We started by looking at how a simple conjecture, a creative guess exposed to brutal criticism, can eventually reach out and explain the mechanics of distant galaxies.
Which leaves us with a final thought to really mull over. When you look at the universe, human beings are physically tiny, fragile creatures living on a small rock in the mundane suburbs of an average galaxy.
Very true.
Yet our capacity to create far-reaching explanations gives us immense cosmic significance. Small physical size does not imply causal insignificance. If our knowledge can reach out to understand the universe, it can eventually reach out to transform those distant environments.
That's incredible.
We are not just passive observers of reality. We are the active mechanism by which the universe understands itself.
It fundamentally changes how you view our place in the universe. This has been an independent Cosmora HQ book overview notice. We highly encourage all listeners to seek lawful access to the full canonical work through the publisher, booksellers, libraries, or authorized services. We'd love to hear your thoughtful engagement with these concepts, and so we leave you with this. Which error in our current understanding will the next great explanation correct?